When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, there was a hullabaloo all across the world. The Soviet Union was a heavily industrialized state with authoritarian response to every problem. It always remained in the top 5 economies. When it collapsed, the expectation was that the global economy would collapse as gross productivity would go down. Why not? 50 new nations were learning how to govern themselves. It's foolhardy to expect growth from them. The result was totally opposite of expectations. Global GDP went up after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Apparently, bookkeeping in Soviet Russia was never up to the mark. Their numbers were not accurate. Lucky for the world that statistical distortion proved to be good for it. It is not always going to be the same. The kind of statistical distortion that has been used to justify the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is proving to be apocalyptic. Its extrusive death is going to leave nations in debt, roads half constructed, buildings empty, heads of states without any support, family heads without family, parents without children, destitute children without parents, and many more. The mayhem is on the way, and Pakistan has provided us with a snapshot. Hello and welcome to TFIPost. I am your host Ananya Sharma. Let's begin with the video report. When the Chinese put forward their plans for the Belt and Road Initiative, they received global support. Multilateral financial institutions, private consultants, and agencies were full of praise for it. The World Bank estimated that BRI has the potential to boost trade flows in nearly 150 countries by 4.1%. The cost cutting was estimated to be in the range of 1.1 to 2.2%. Its impact on the GDP of East Asian and Pacific developing countries was supposed to be incredible. The average GDP growth in these regions was projected to be somewhere between 2.6 and 4.9%. In its later reports, the World Bank informed 7 billion people that Chinese BRI would increase income by 3.4% and bring 7.6 million out of poverty. London-based consultants Center for Economics and Business Research estimated that by 2040, BRI would lead to an annual increase of $7.1 trillion by 2040. It also predicted that the project would invite more and more countries. If we assume that institutions like these were not flooded with people with vested interests, then prima facie it makes sense. I mean, the project is spread all across the world. It encompasses continents like Australia, Asia, Africa, and even Europe. Countries coming under its ambit include democracies, autocracies, and dictatorship. Even the most gullible ones would assume that the Chinese are doing it with some sort of preparation and risk analysis. China being well accepted as a WTO member is another point that was in its favor. The Chinese built the foundation pretty quick. In 2013, Xi Jinping officially announced the initiative. In later years, the project became so important for Jinping that he deemed it fit to put the project in the Constitution of China. BRI was and in fact is crucial for Jinping's foreign policy. Jinping has formed a Belt and Road Construction Leadership Group for this purpose. It reports directly to the State Council of China and is composed of several political heavyweights. BRI has different forums for different regions too. For Africa, it is Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, while for the Arab world, it is China-Arab States Cooperation Forum. The project's financing is taken care of by nationalized Chinese banks, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Silk Road Bank, and other debt instruments. China has poured money into countries that need it the most. In 2013, it invested $93.38 billion in countries under the ambit of BRI. With some minor fluctuations, the number kept increasing for a few more years until COVID-19. The individual breakdown of Chinese debt exposure to these countries is a fair way to measure China's intentions. In Asia, countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh became the main target of China. In Sri Lanka, China has invested more than $15 billion. It has used this money to suppress the island nation rather than anything else. Similarly, in Pakistan, China has invested more than $65 billion for the overtly ambitious and impractical China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or the CPEC. In neighboring Bangladesh, the project cost of China's overall investment is well above $40 billion. Talking about Chinese investments in Africa. Between 2013 and 2020, Sub-Saharan Africa comprised 21% of total Chinese investment in BRI. Only China's neighboring East Asia could topple it with 26% of total share. Energy, transport, metals and real estate are the main sectors in which Chinese invested. Until 2021, China had poured more than 70% of its $1 trillion into the countries participating in BRI. With such a hefty amount, it is worthwhile to check the return on investment. The Chinese have been often accused of appropriating countries' sovereign powers in the name of BRI. Their control on lending institutions and opaque rates of interest are cited as evidence for these claims. First, let's talk about what happened to Asian countries that joined the project. CPEC or the CPEC is struggling to get going. Even those small projects that the Chinese have completed are turning out to be faulty. With floods leading to civil war in Pakistan, there is little to no possibility that CPEC completion would see the light of the day. Why would they, if locals are not happy with it? So, where does it leave Pakistan? Well, Pakistan is left with China occupying its territory and a massive national debt of nearly $29 billion. How big is it? Well, for the context, it is more than double that of Pakistan's forex reserve. There is no way that Pakistan could pay it back and the Chinese won't ever be lenient towards it. Pakistan had a chance to learn from Sri Lanka. Chinese involvement led to civil unrest in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's forex reserve nosedived while Chinese kept mounting pressure on them for repayments. At last, India, US and other countries pitched in to save the island nation from tribalism. Similarly, Bangladesh is on the gates of IMF to save itself from the onslaught, and that is despite them beating India in per capita income. Indonesia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos and Malaysia are some of the countries in the region bearing the brunt of trusting China's BRI. While these countries have strong neighbors, namely India, to protect them, non-Asian nations have literally very few avenues to go. Consider Djibouti. It asked China for support and in return the Chinese buried it under debt. Between 2014 and 2019, China's debt to the country increased by a massive 569%. In Uganda, China comprises over 38% of debtors. It recorded a 438% jump in overall trade. Countries severely affected by China's debt trap include Djibouti, Maldives, Uganda, Ivory Coast, Pakistan, Republic of Congo, Bangladesh, Nepal, Madagascar, Nigeria, Rwanda, Mongolia and Grenada. China is now the highest bilateral creditor to 52 countries falling under BRI. The height of tragedy is that lots of countries could not get large chunks of promised money due to corruption and other reasons. China kept building asset bubbles and it had to burst one day. As soon as COVID-19 struck, lots of countries got an opportunity to rethink on the BRI project. They realized that they are neck deep into Chinese debt. The demand for waiver, restructuring and rescheduling started to gain momentum. China tried to allay their fears by cancelling lots of non-substantial debts given to many countries like Sudan, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique and Ivory Coast. China also pledged its allegiance to the debt service suspension initiative under the G20 scheme. Expectedly, the moral posturing has not proven to be good enough for maintaining China's credibility. The fact is that the Chinese establishment itself does not trust the viability of this project. In 2021, a large part of its BRI investment shifted away from East Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa to MENA region and Europe. Surely, there is a geopolitical angle to it as China is trying to replace America in both regions. But then, how would you explain reduced allocation for the dream project of Xi Jinping? In the financial year 2022, China invested only $59.5 billion in their flagship BRI project. The figure for financial year 2021 was $60.5 billion, which was $43.5 billion less than the allotment for financial year 20. That is a steep decline, especially given the fact that BRI countries account for nearly 29% of China's total trade. China's declining interest is now impacting the on-ground reality too. Compared to 2015, the deal size for financial year 2022 was 21% smaller. Similarly, the deal size of investment has declined steeply from $585 million in 2015 to $355 million in financial year 2022. It had its main impact on construction sector investment by China. Somehow, it is becoming increasingly tough for China to get this going. There are multitudes of reasons behind it. For one, countries all across the world, especially in BRI territory, are now aware of the debt trap diplomacy. Local population is also aware of it. Protests against China in Africa, Pakistan, Maldives, Sri Lanka are prime examples of their awareness. Then there is the problem of collapsing China. China's economic recovery from COVID is not yet complete. That is because Xi Jinping has started a war against Chinese oligarchs criticizing his policy. Even someone like Jack Ma was not spared. Additionally, big banks are on the verge of collapse due to real estate and other associated crises. They are the same that poured money into the project. Banks would expect that some return from these projects would help them. That is next to impossible. The main reason behind it is that most of the countries that have taken money from these banks are low-income ones. In financial year 2023, they owe 37% of their debt to China. Pakistan leads the pack with $77.3 billion. Angola, Ethiopia, Kenya and Sri Lanka are other big countries on the verge of default. In the case of Maldives, Chinese debt is way over Maldivian GDP. In terms of continent, Africa has to pay $150 billion to China. Expecting this money to come back is unrealistic. Glimpses of it are already visible. In October last year, it was reported that two countries were so fed up with China that they refused to pay loans, effectively catching China in its own debt trap. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the destiny of China's BRI. The way their population is getting old and the economy is collapsing, the Chinese are going to be caught in their own debt trap. BRI is dead. Make no mistake about it.